I felt he was most adept at dealing with cases where there were children. He had tremendous empathy towards children and tremendous respect for the criminal justice system.
He was known as someone who would sue the county.
For all of us who used to conduct jury duty, we all have a reason to be upset with Frank.
The establishment never got around to falling in love with Frank.
I mean, the Efren Cruz case, I mean, that took some serious balls.
You know, he sent some of my friends to the system. He sent me to the system several times. There's nothing I wouldn't do for him.
I was born and raised in Long Beach, California. My father was a Spanish teacher. 4 brothers. I had a brother 2 years older, a twin brother, and a brother 2 years younger. So we were kind of like a pack. I grew up in the 60s in Los Angeles, and the Watts riots happened in 1965. I was in high school. It was the apex of the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War. I knew kids in my neighborhood who went off to Vietnam and never came home. The year I graduated from high school, which was 1968, a week before my 18th birthday, Martin Luther King was assassinated. And 2 months later, just before I graduated from high school, Bobby Kennedy was killed. People wanted to see a lot of changes in this country at that time. I really wanted to change the circumstances that existed in this country if I could, and I saw the law as a way to do that. I went to UC Davis, Martin Luther King Jr. School of Law. The name of the institution had a draw for me. After my first year of law school, I volunteered and worked with the United Farm Workers in the Central Valley. It was the grape boycott era, and I was able to work with Cesar Chavez's legal team on some really ground-level issues early in that farm worker struggle. My first job was in legal services in Northern California. I had the chance to see California Supreme Court arguments in an important case at the time, Bakke versus the Regents of the University of California. And I thought the university was doing a really poor job of representing their admissions processes and consideration of race in admissions in higher education. So I worked on, became interested and worked on that issue, ended up working on briefs that went to the U.S. Supreme Court in the Bakke case. We had an impact on how that case developed. I was 18 months into practice and I was quoted in Newsweek on the Bakke case. So I was very quickly at the forefront of some major issues of the day.
I first came to know Frank in 1977 in the small town of Woodland, the county seat of Yolo County in Northern California. I was a police and courts reporter, and my job was to cover the police and courts. I became aware of this attorney in town who worked at the Legal Aid Society. He was the managing attorney, and mostly I became aware of him. I really didn't cross paths too much, but he had a reputation in Woodland for being someone who really caused a lot of trouble. He and his office really worked hard to create a new understanding between the police and the Latino community about what was expected, and in particularly how police should treat the residents of the Latino community. And this was 1977, and this was rural Northern California. So there still was a little bit of the cowboy in Northern California. So imagine my surprise 20 years later when I finally make it back to Santa Barbara and find Frank as this establishment legend.
Opportunity arose, and I applied and had the good fortune to be appointed right at the end of Jerry Brown's administration. I got a call on a Friday night, was sworn in on the next Monday, and I didn't know. I thought I'd be able to go back and do my legal aid work. Joe Lodge said, no, you got to be here tomorrow. I'll have a robe for you in a courtroom.
I think the case that I really remember that was crazy and fun, and it was probably not the first, but it was in the old Muni building, and that was the Dario Pini case. And Dario Pini, you know, owned an empire of rental properties in town, then as now, and then as now, they were a mess, and garbage was mattresses, trash, rats, way too many people, too little space. And the cops had discovered that there was this disproportionate number of police calls to Dario Pini properties, and they were getting tired of it. So they did this whole, I mean, it was the most comprehensive sweep on any landlord, slumlord ever done in Santa Barbara. And they had like 15 different jurisdictions, and they all went after Dario. And Frank got the case. And it was, you know, Dario versus Steve Wiley, who was then the attorney for the city. And it was actually one of the most boring trials ever, because when you get past the opening arguments and then you get into the drudgery of evidence, it just is death. So all of that, mercifully, I have forgotten. But what was really great was at the end of it, you have the sentencing. And it was one of the great sentences of all times. It was one of the great times to be in a courtroom, because Frank looks out and he's got, you know, volumes and volumes and volumes of evidence, and Dario is guilty as charged, and so the question is, what are you going to do about it? And Frank says, okay, you have a choice. You can go to jail, or I can sentence you to live in one of your apartments. It's up to you. And Dario says, that's easy. I'm going to live in jail.
I felt he was most adept at dealing with cases where there were children. He had tremendous empathy towards children and tremendous respect for the criminal justice system. So he wanted to do what was in the best interest of justice, which often meant making sure the child was comfortable enough so that the child could get on the stand and tell the truth.
Sylvia Vasquez, as a lot of people might remember, she was running a daycare center out of her property, I think up on Foothill Road. She was very popular, and it was a really shocking case where child support workers went in there and they found that she had gotten these kids and adopted them of her own as foster kids. And they were extremely troubled, and she had, 2 of them were living in cages. They were so out of control, she said, that they had to be caged. They were given buckets, you know, to go to the bathroom in.
We were able to take one of those cages and take them out of evidence and bring them to the bottom floor of the courthouse. And I wanted him to inspect it. And he took time out of his lunch hour. The defense attorney was there, the bailiff was there, and he walked around the cage and he looked at it. And I explained the various measurements to him, and he said that he understood. And then I turned to him and said, Judge, would you mind stepping inside that cage so that you could have a sense of what the child did and saw? And the defense attorney objected, and the judge turned to him and said, there's nobody else here besides us. I'm going to do just that. And he got inside, stayed there for a moment, turned around and came back out. He really cared, and he cared about the individual, and he deeply cared about a criminal justice system. He wanted to do what was right, not necessarily what was popular for me or the defense attorney, but what was right.
It was just a powerful moment to be in the court.
I didn't have too many positive role models, male role models, and the only male role models that I bumped into a lot was actually the judge. The last time I went into his chambers, it was September 18th of '98. They were trying to convict me as a juvenile. And in reality, the charges that I was getting was going to put me away for, in some ways, for good. They were debating if I should go into a juvenile facility or to an adult facility because I was going to be 18 and because of the charges. And I got my prison suspension. I got my prison sentence suspended, and I got sent back up to Los Prietos Boys Camp. He actually listened to my case, and if it would have been for him, I still would have been incarcerated right now. It's a hard job to do, you know, and people are going to agree with you and people are going to disagree with you, you know, and sometimes you just got to take a risk, you know, and the risk that he did in my life made a big impact on my family.
When you look at all the judges on the bench, and over all the years I've been doing this, you know, you come out of court sometimes shaking your head saying, how could that judge do that? But when, at the end of the day, when you look back on it, you really know why the judge did it, in some cases, and some you don't. I think with Frank, at the end of the day, when he ruled, he was trying to be fair. He didn't have an agenda.
I hope to be remembered as somebody who developed and built respect for our systems of government, and particularly the court system and the justice system. Without that respect from all aspects of society, we really can't govern from the judicial branch the way that we're expected to. So if I've helped in that regard, then I think I've played my part.